everyone. I will call to order this meeting of the Albany Housing Advisory Commission. We will start with a roll call, please.
Yes, Commissioner Cantu. Commissioner Marks. Here. Commissioner Ramirez. Present. Commissioner Winkler.
Here.
And Chair Tiedemann.
Here. We will now go to the land acknowledgement, which will be read by our Vice Chair.
The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to these indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home.
Thank you very much. With that, we will move to approval of the minutes. Do we have any questions or comments on the minutes from members of the Commission?
I move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Motion and a second. Before we go to the vote, do we have any public comment on this item?
If you wish to speak on the minutes, please use the raise the hand icon or come up to the dais or the podium.
Seeing none in the room, and I believe none online, we will go forth. We have a motion and a second. Could we please call the roll for approving the minutes?
Yes, Commissioner Cantu. Yes. Commissioner Marks. Commissioner Ramirez.
Yes.
Commissioner Winkler.
Yes.
And Chair Tiedemann.
Yes. Thank you. That brings us to public comment. This is for people desiring to address the Commission on an item that is not on our agenda. We will limit speakers to 3 minutes. And please note that the Brown Act limits advisory bodies and all bodies' ability to take and discuss items substantially that are not on the agenda. Therefore, these will be either referred to staff for comment or briefly answered, or possibly referred to a future agenda. And in this and all other items for public comment, please make sure your comments are respectful to other members of the public, staff, and the members of the Commission. That will go, I believe we have in the room.
Good evening. After the last Housing Advisory Committee meeting, it seemed clear to me that there was a large gap in the knowledge of the rights and responsibilities of both the tenants and the landlords, a gap that should be filled with education and information, not more regulation. There is a large body of law, federal, state, and local statutes that clearly define the proper performance of duty of a housing provider to their residents. Also, there's a substantial legal system to enforce those statutes that include free and moderate cost legal advice or representation for those who need it. This committee has an opportunity now to educate both property providers and residents of their rights and responsibilities, and to encourage both parties to exert their rights through the existing legal processes. The City of Albany presently requires that all housing providers register with the city each unit that they rent each year and pay the proper fees. You should know by now that the city understands that between 20 to 40% of the total number of housing providers have not registered their units. So we already have a program that is substantially incomplete. I would appreciate it if you exert pressure on the city administration to make it their highest priority to get the maximum number of registrations to occur. Why? Why would I want to do that? Every year, the housing providers must register their units, and at that point in time, the city could require that both the housing providers and the tenants receive full documentation about their rights and responsibilities and ability to seek out and find affordable, supportive services when needed. That alone would be a major accomplishment that you could take great pride in yourselves as a committee. More education and information, not regulation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have another comment in the room? Please go ahead.
Yes, and thank you and good evening.
My comment has to do with the website, and I hope it's a work in progress. I know that there have been a lot of changes made recently, and when clicking on several of the links, I get an error message saying this page is not available. When I click on other links, I get a very skinny thing of whatever the particular topic is about, almost unreadable. So I presume it's a work in progress. I hope the progress can progress expeditiously and that it will become useful. The website will become useful again in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any comments online?
We do.
Hi. Interestingly, my comments sort of fit into what Mr. Papalia said. Would like to see a rent registry in Albany that requires the landlords to put the address of the units that they are, the houses or the apartments or whatever that they are renting out, so that there's a way for people to know which buildings in Albany are rentals, so that we could ultimately have a tenants union that has as much many people pulling as many people together as the landlords seem to have. So I'm not sure if that's different from what he was saying. I know that the landlords have to register, but they don't have to put the address of the rental. And my impression is that the other cities that around here have a rent registry that requires the address of the rental. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any further comments online?
If anyone else wishes to speak, please use the raise the hand icon. No.
Thank you all for your comments. On the website, I assume that is a work in progress. I don't know if you can confirm.
Yes, so apologies. I was going to do that in announcements and kind of just run through how to do it as a fix. We did switch over to a no website carrier platform, so we are having more than one issue with it, and so thank you for your patience, and I apologize for any documentation that you did not get to read. There is a copy of the packet in the back that you can peruse, and yeah.
Growth pains, I'm sure.
Pardon? Yes, yes.
Thank you for that. That will bring us, we have no presentations this evening, so that will bring us to item number 5, our discussion and possible action, where we have our main item of the evening, presentation and discussion on just cause for eviction policy. And I will turn it over to staff for presentation.
Can I ask a question, point of order? I'm sorry, my brain is like a sieve. I do not remember your name, and I'm not sure exactly what your role is. I think you were to assist us, but I'm not sure how. So could you explain that again?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, good evening, commissioners and members of the public. My name is Chris Hess. I'm a consultant with the city assisting in housing element implementation issues. So a lot of the different research and that type of factual support that the commission is going to need in order to make its recommendations is what I'm brought on here for. So for tonight, we're going to be talking about just cause for eviction policies. As a reminder, this is the slate of issues that the commission is going to be looking at this year. We're at the second of these. We'll still be having rent stabilization, rent review, and legal assistance coming up before we actually start turning to recommendations. And these are the dates that this commission will be meeting to talk about these. So in talking about just cause for eviction, we're going to be just providing a short presentation here to establish a factual basis. There is a lot more information in the packet and in the staff report that details what various cities have done, but I'll be giving you about 10 to 15 minutes of material here. We'll be looking primarily at state policies and where any gaps might be that would be options for a local ordinance. And our purpose here tonight is not actually to take any action, but to gather feedback from the public and from members of the Housing Advisory Commission, from all of you. So just cause for eviction, just cause is a legally valid reason to file an eviction. You may hear the words unlawful detainer coming up in this discussion at times, and so that is the name of the action, the type of lawsuit that the landlord must file in court in order to initiate an eviction. All evictions must be carried out in court in California, and an unlawful detainer is a lawsuit that occurs after the landlord has given notice and a certain time period to fix whatever was wrong. So the types of just causes really divide in two. There's what we call at-fault causes, meaning the tenant violated the lease or the law. Most typically, this is non-payment of rent, 90% of the time or more. But other lease violations or illegal activity, things that the tenant did wrong, can precipitate an eviction. No-fault evictions are also very key to understand because that is when the landlord has some kind of a reason to want the unit vacant or offline. For example, that the owner is going to be moving into the unit or they're going to be withdrawing from the rental market entirely. Then they would be filing an eviction with a no-fault type of just cause, and that would be, forcing the tenant to leave for those reasons. The goal of the just cause ordinances at the state or local level is really just to prevent arbitrary or retaliatory evictions. So as we talked about federal and state last time with anti-discrimination, we'll mention here federal protections, although they're very limited. Most just cause law is at the state level. Federal just cause is required basically in units where there is a significant federal financial involvement, which basically means like a long-term subsidy contract, project-based Section 8. The federal government does require that owners have a just cause for eviction. Additionally, in that type of housing, the Violence Against Women Act is an important thing to understand, that it is not possible to evict a person who has experienced domestic violence, and you can't evict them on the basis of what occurred in that domestic violence incident. They would still need to pay their rent, but if there was some sort of activity at the unit, as a result of that, you can't evict a tenant for that disturbance in federal housing. Additionally, something that does apply to all housing, federally subsidized and otherwise, is the Fair Housing Act. And eviction is one action that a landlord cannot take anywhere for a discriminatory reason. And that would be a reason that a tenant could file a complaint with HUD with a property owner. Much more relevant to our discussion tonight is California's laws. Government Code 1946.2 is the law. It is established through January 1st, 2030, at which time the protections under it will sunset unless it is renewed. And the two pieces of legislation recently that were really key here was AB 1482 in 2019, the Tenant Protection Act, and SB 567, the Homelessness Prevention Act in 2023. 1482 will come up again because there was a lot of rent control regulation in that law. It had a lot to do with evictions, and SB 567 was brought in order to try to plug certain loopholes that the state perceived in 1482. This regime applies statewide, so wherever you are, including the city of Albany, this is a floor for protections for tenants that exist. It does apply here. Albany does not have a local tenant protection ordinance, and so this is the law that property owners and tenants must respond to here. So there are several key exemptions to the just cause ordinance statewide, and I'm not going to read all of these. I just want them here for reference, but a few of them here that I bolded I will mention. Units constructed within the last 15 years do not require a just cause. That 15 years is on a rolling basis, so whatever the year is minus 15 units constructed in that year are just coming into being protected under the just cause ordinances. Certain dormitories is an exemption. Thought it was worth mentioning since we do have a lot of university-owned housing at UC Village here. Just as an FYI, nothing that we're talking about doing here would impact UC Village. It has a different set of legal regimes. And the owner's primary residence. There is not a just cause required if at the owner's primary residence they are renting to a tenant that shares the bathroom or kitchen, or wherever the owner rents no more than 2 bedrooms. And then those other exemptions that are noted in the law. There are some limitations that are important to understand when looking at what we could do locally with an ordinance. 1482 only applies after all of the tenants have lived in the unit for 12 months or more. Or in the event that there's tenants moving in at different times, at least one tenant has to be there for 24 months. Before that, a just cause is not required, and after that it would be. It's noteworthy that if you have a year-long lease, at the end of the lease, the landlord does not have a just cause at that moment. The mere expiration of a lease is not a just cause. If the property owner has to notify tenants if any exemptions apply in order for those exemptions to actually be utilized. And it does open up a cause of civil action in the case that that tenants feel that the property owners violated their rights under it. So the at-fault just causes, as I mentioned, are that the tenant violated the lease or the law. That includes non-payment of rent, as well as all of these other ones. Some things like subletting in violation of the lease, failure to vacate after you've given your notice. Those all could represent at-fault just causes. And generally, when we're talking about local tenant protection ordinances, we're not covering that in a lot of detail. It's more the no-fault causes that are discussed in local ordinances. So the owner can move in or have certain close family members move in and remove the tenant on that basis. Under the Ellis Act, the landlord may withdraw the unit from the rental market and demand that the tenant leave. Substantial remodeling is a reason that the tenant may have to leave. It needs to be a health and safety reason, and it requires that the landlord be obtaining permits for the renovation in order to apply. And then finally, if there's some code violations and the unit is red tagged or indicated as not habitable, that can be a cause for eviction. There are much longer notice periods and relocation assistance of 1 month required whenever an owner takes advantage of one of these types of evictions. A worthy piece of data is the number of unlawful detainer actions filed in Albany between 2018 and 2024. Like everywhere, there was a huge dip during the COVID pandemic, the moratoria, and also other types of rental assistance that was available, and a real slowdown in the courts, I would say. This was experienced everywhere. So looking at the number of rental units in the county-wide and looking at the number of rental units in Albany, as we noted in the staff report, eviction is less common in Albany as a share of the number of rental units than in other parts of Alameda County. It is, it's also worth noting that these unlawful detainer filings do not indicate necessarily every eviction, because tenants may choose to leave before an unlawful detainer is filed, and it's not an indication that the tenant did anything wrong or that the property owner did anything wrong. Many of them may have been settled. These are simply filings. That's the data that the courts make available.
Sir, does that
Could we please save questions for public comment? Thank you.
There'll be a public comment, and I'll handle that, so no problem. So some of the nearby cities have adopted tenant protection ordinances. The Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, LA, Richmond, and unincorporated Alameda County are particularly mentioned in the staff report, some of the things they've done. And also the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in its transit-oriented communities policy has model policies that it suggests be adopted. Some of the types of protections that local groups have, or local governments have included, are including more housing types. For example, single-family homes that are, where a bedroom is rented, perhaps. They may reduce the length of tenancy requirement, the 12 months before just cause evictions apply. They may apply it after 6 months or after 1 day, and say that property owners need just cause then. They may limit no-fault evictions entirely. They can say that the owner always has a right to move in under state law, but they may limit the exact relationship between the owner and the person moving in to be a spouse, an adult child, a parent, a very close family member. And they may be specific about what kinds of repair actually precipitate a substantial rehabilitation. For example, in San Francisco, it needs to achieve a very high dollar level before it can be a reason to leave. Additionally, they may require much greater relocation payments from the landlord than what state law's 1 month requires, and they may require that after a substantial rehab, or if the property owner puts the unit back on the market, even years later, that the tenant has a right to return to that unit. And then finally, because the protections of 1482 and 567 end on January 1st, 2030, they may extend those types of protections indefinitely in local tenant protection ordinances. So there's several kinds of things that local governments can't do in these ordinances. They can be more protective of tenants, not less. It is a floor of protection. They can remove the end date of 2030. Through rent boards and housing departments, they can provide local enforcement, but ultimately these any damages do still need to go through the court system. And then they can limit in certain ways while still maintaining deference to the Ellis Act, Costa-Hawkins, and the right of a landlord to a fair rate of return. You can't create regulation that makes it impossible for landlords to make a fair rate of return on their property. So as we noted here, some cities are requiring that property owners file eviction notices with the city in order to have that eviction be valid. These types of cities that have within their organization some type of department or board that's dedicated to housing issues is usually the place that those things are filed, and if there's additional enforcement, that's the source of that additional enforcement. For Albany, of course, we know we don't have that type of body within the city government, and there's no identified resources currently to create that. So that is a consideration. So these are some of the questions that may be suggested for the commissioners and the public to talk about. I'm going to stop this part of the presentation now. Hopefully that provided a certain base, and we'll try to be a resource in answering any questions and providing any more detail to this research that we've done. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for that presentation. We will now move to questions from committee members about that presentation. And we'll go to public comment and then do discussion afterwards. Are there any questions from committee members? For it.
No, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Appreciate all the information. I'm looking at this chart here that had the evictions. So it said that on the chart, it said the numbers came from the state. it said where they came from.
Yes, there's a dashboard that the county maintains in the Alameda County Superior Court.
So, but how did they get, in Albany, I know that we don't report to any local agency when there's an eviction, so how did they get those? Was it just cases that went to court that they got the numbers, or how did they? I'm not sure how they got the numbers.
Well, I couldn't speak to the mechanics of it, but of course, whenever a lawsuit is filed, the address is going to be in a city, and I think that that's being recorded and reported. It's nice that you can actually, search for just a specific city or the county in general and make some kind of conclusions, even though the data has its limitations.
So this is probably a broad question, and there's other people in the audience that could probably answer it better, but my question is, if I'm a landlord in Albany and I want to evict Aaron because he hasn't paid his rent, what are the steps? Like, what steps do I go through? And maybe it's too much detail for other people, but so I'm sorry if it is. I'm just wondering what they go through now, what happens?
So there's just a brief outline of the key steps for the eviction process in the staff report. Did you want just to go over?
Well, okay, so I'm in Albany. Where do I go if I'm assuming I send the tenant a letter, but then who do I legally file with? Like,
You file with the county court.
okay,
The county court system. And so the data that was shown in the graph were filings for lawful detainers. So as Chris mentioned, it doesn't mean that they went through suit or, decision, but
right,
they were
okay.
filed.
okay.
Margie, let me just add to that, because I own a property and done this stuff.
Yeah.
First of all, evictions are like a last resort. I mean, I, as a property owner, want to resolve it with my residents, right? And when I go file, I really can't file by myself. I have to hire a lawyer to do it. It usually costs $5 or $10 grand to start that process as a property owner. So then you file it. Once you file it, there's a record.
So you're filing where?
At the Alameda County
County,
Courthouse.
okay.
Typically in Oakland is where you'll hear it, sometimes in Hayward if you have to go to municipal court down there. But when you get there, when you've filed, and the tenant gets served, that they've been sued in unlawful detainer action, then there's a court date. And the courts are so backed up right now, it could be 3-6 months before you get a court date. You go in there, and the judge says, go to the hallway, talk to the attorneys, try to come up with a settlement. So most of this stuff gets settled. Not a lot of it ends up in an actual bona fide sheriff coming here, because I've done that too, where the sheriff has to come and lock the person out. So it is a real process. And I think the costs, because landlords don't have a legal fund that is provided for them to go and evict tenants. Tenants do. They get free legal counsel. It's a really extreme case. So, but that's the process that as I know it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I just was wondering, like, what the steps
No,
were.
it's a good question, because I don't think people realize everything that's involved. You have to give a notice. It's now a 10-day notice, failure to pay. And then the tenant has, I think, 2 weeks now to respond to that. So it's not a bum rush to an eviction. And then if the tenant doesn't respond, you're forced to a lawsuit. There's no other course of action for the owner. He must, or she must sue.
Right. Go ahead.
Thank you for those clarifications. Vice Chair, you had
I
questions?
have a follow-up question around this discussion, just to trying to understand. So for any properties which have to follow the state, AB 1482, then if the lease comes to an end, and basically from what I'm reading, it sounds like because there is no the tenant is not obligated to leave the property, but it sounds like it has to be filed anyway, even if, for example, if the tenant agrees, to leave at the end of the year. Is there something that still needs to be filed? That's the part that was a little bit confusing on the just cause, the state law. Can you clarify that?
Sure, I'll give my understanding, and I know that our commissioners have a lot of expertise too here, but my understanding is, so it is not a just cause for an eviction to try to evict the tenant who did their payment of rent and followed their lease at the end of their lease. There needs to be some way of allowing the tenant to extend the lease. So that was what that part was about. It was really about that you can't file an eviction simply because a tenant overstayed a lease that was time limited. Does that help?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it automatically rolls over to a month-to-month. So you can have a fixed-term lease of 12 months, tenant stays on the 13th month and pays you rent, it rolls over. It's a continual lease, and that's in the state law. So it's automatic. It is not a just cause just because it's over. Sorry, you have to go now. You can't do that. The tenant automatically has a right to stay.
Okay, but if the tenant doesn't want to stay, there's nothing that needs to be done.
Sure.
Okay.
And typically in our leases, we ask that the tenants give us a 30-day notice if they're not going to stay past that first 12 months. Because we want to be in communication with the tenants so that we can help assist on the move-out. Because in the law, too, around security deposits, when a tenant gives you a notice to move, they have a right to a prior-to-move-out inspection 2 weeks before the end of the lease term, where you as a property owner or manager have to go and identify, hey, you broke the window or you punched a hole through the wall, that's going to cost $500 to fix. The tenant has the first right of repair. So the tenant has to go and fix it, and then comes back, and then if the repair is not satisfactory, only then can you charge the deposit. So there's a whole bunch of steps that have to occur when the tenant moves out. Now, I've had tenants leave in the middle of the night because they did something they shouldn't have. And in that case, you have to chase them to give them back the deposit. If you don't have the deposit back to them in 21 days, they can take you to court and get 3 times the security deposit back. So it's really a very strict, very fast timeline.
Other questions from committee members?
Well, excuse me, I just have a couple. On page 9 of the printout, when you're talking about the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and it's the last paragraph, and it says that it advises jurisdictions to adopt a local just cause ordinance that has no sunset date, requires property owners to file termination notices with a local agency. So what would be the local, whatever we designate would be the local agency? Okay, and I have a follow-up to that, and that is, I noticed your last slide said, something about Albany not having the resources or a body that does this. What if the city looked at sharing a body with another city that did that? I mean, that we could share the costs, would bring it down. We could both have that, registering, building, rental. Anyway, okay, sorry, that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Marks. Yes. So cities do require that filing in some cases and make it a cause for invalidating an eviction if a property owner fails to file. That's not the case here because we don't have a body in Albany that receives that the way that the Berkeley Rent Board does, for example. So that's all correct. In terms of sharing administrative burdens with others, it's interesting you say that in regards to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission's recommendations, because their Bay Area-wide recommendation is that all of the different cities come together and have a standard approach and a regional body that would apply all of those kind of enforcement mechanisms and gathering of information, registry of rental units perhaps. Nothing like that exists right now. That is something that MTC would love to see occur. And in the absence of that, they make this recommendation that this is one of the ways in which you can be scored positively as a transit-oriented community.
If I can add to that, I want to note that many of the jurisdictions that were listed as having just cause ordinances don't necessarily have a rent review body that's elected or appointed otherwise, and they have those notices filed with some member of staff, like the Alameda County uses the Community Development Agency Director, or I think others use, their Housing Community Development Director, other staff positions like that, so that they file the notice and have it on file. Any further questions from members of the committee?
Just a quick comment. Recently, I read that 3 CSUs are looking at combining their administrations because of all of the financial deficits that are going on. And I think these are things that maybe cities are going to be looking at in terms of how do we go about helping one another to make sure that we take care of the people who need to be taken care of. So we need to be open to those ideas because it's something that in reality is happening to us right now.
Thank you. Last chance for questions. Seeing none, we will open the floor to public comment. How many folks do we have online?
So far, one hand raised. If anyone else wishes to speak, please use the raise hand icon.
Let's go with 3
Currently
minutes.
2.
And start with people in the room.
Good evening again. I just wanted to express a few concerns and thoughts I have on this topic. First of all, Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, Richmond, have just cause for eviction ordinances. That's great. There's no reason why Albany has to have one. And the fact that they have them is great. It works for them. It doesn't mean that Albany has to have it. Secondly, I'm concerned about your time, city council's time, staff's time. It's going to take many, many hours to go through this whole process. Those hours don't come free. I don't know if you guys get paid. Maybe you don't. But it's going to take a lot of your time. It's going to take a lot of the city council's time. It'll take a lot of staff time to develop an ordinance that may or may not be needed. So that cost is of concern to me, and I hope it's of concern to you as well. And third, the fact that, well, we know what's going on in Washington, right? All kinds of things are happening and we don't know why. There's no transparency. We have a little bit of transparency here in Albany, but not a whole lot. This chart is interesting, but what does it mean? It says there were unlawful detainers filing, fewer than in most communities in the state, probably. Very, very few unlawful detainers filed in Albany. It has no indication about how many of those actually resulted in evictions. So there's a lack of data, and I'm concerned that an ordinance which may not be needed may be put in place. So I urge you to find out what's really going on and not walk into something blindly that's going to discourage people from maintaining to coming in and providing rental housing and keeping their rental housing. So I think that's all I have to say right now, but I urge you to use caution and consider the costs and the unintended consequences of putting what is perhaps an unnecessary ordinance in place. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next in the room.
Hi. My concern is about how more this kind of regulation will actually reduce the number of units available for rent. I know I helped clients sell a home in Albany around 10 years ago, and to an investor who was glad to purchase it, fix it up, because it needed a lot of fix-up. And it was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house that he rented happily for 10 years. And then last year, he was very concerned that more of this regulation was going to happen, and that the ballot measure to Measure R that was going to start charging him fees on his gross rents. He just said, I don't want to do this anymore. It just looks like it's going in the wrong direction. So he ended up getting the place vacant and selling it. And so that's one less house available to rent. My question to you is, does this kind of regulation expand or contract the number of available units for rent? Will it encourage people to rent their condominiums or their ADUs or their single-family homes? Or would it discourage them and say, I don't really want to have to deal with all of this stuff. I'm going to end up looking down the road that this is just going to become a giant headache, or could potentially. And I think it's a good time to sell and then invest that money somewhere else. And that's what happened. I know specifically of a beautiful 3-bedroom house on Talbot Street in Albany, right near Marin Avenue, that happened. And there are a lot of people who that own condominiums on Pierce Street that rent them, that I'm sorry, but I have to inform you, a lot of them are not registered, because I'm pretty sure of that, because there would be a lot more people of those that would show up on the registry. That it would end up going, gee, do I really want to go through this? And it would be just easier to just sell it. And then whenever a place gets sold in Albany, it will become owner-occupied and no longer ever available for rent. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Another comment in the room?
Hello. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. It was very clear, except for I didn't completely understand the graph, and I wondered if you could discuss that a bit more. So with my personal situation is I had a tenant who I believe had psychological problems. I'll explain what happened. And he very much wanted his apartment upgraded, but he did not enjoy having anybody in his unit. He didn't want painters in there. He didn't want the tile guy. He didn't want anybody in. So he decided to take it upon himself to renovate his unit, and he was having trouble, I guess, getting he was trying to redo his cabinets, like put a new paint on them. So he decided to use a blowtorch to take the old paint off. And he disconnected, of course, with blowtorch. He was setting off the fire alarms. So he decided to deactivate those. He also painted the linoleum brown and, did other things of that sort. But, that was just cosmetic. I'm not terribly concerned about painting the floors brown, but what I was very concerned about was the blowtorch and also, most importantly, deactivating the smoke alarms. So what I'd like to say to you is please do not make it impossible for us to evict people who are hazardous to the building. I mean, I had children that were living in that building at the time. Anybody could have gone up in a blaze due to his activities. So if we do find that we have a problematic tenant, we do have to have a means to evict them, and I hope you will take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Seeing no more in the room, let's go to online.
Hi, thank you. This has been really interesting, and thank you for the presentation. I just have a few questions. When I looked online to see what the California no fault or whatever it is, just cause eviction, when I looked it up on that, it had things that were exempted, and you didn't mention them, and I'm wondering if the information I found is wrong or if it's true, because it looked like there was not just hotels and dormitories, but most single-family homes, townhouses, and condominiums, and homes built within 15 years prior to the termination. And I'm wondering, is that true? I just wanted, if somebody could confirm that, because it didn't get brought up. And if that is true, it seems like if Albany does have our own ordinance, maybe we would want to change some of the, change that so that single-family homes, townhouses, and condominiums would be included. Or maybe it's not true, this is bad information. I also wanted to comment, I just think that the idea that we don't need to have a just cause because it might be a lot of work or it may take some time doesn't seem like very good reasoning to me. I think it's really important that there be protection for tenants in Albany so that people feel safe. And then the point about that was brought up about people not wanting to rent. I'd be curious if somebody has looked at the other cities that have done this, and has that caused that, are there no rentals there, or very few, because people don't like the rules, you know, like Berkeley, Oakland, Alameda, El Cerrito, the other cities that have their own just cause for eviction ordinances. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next up.
Hello. Well, as a member of the Diverse Housing Working Group and its successor, Albany Thrives Together, we've occasionally, not a lot, we get calls from renters who have problems, you know, and the biggest reasons, the largest number, of course, is large increases in rent. And this was mostly several years ago. I don't know if rents have been going up quite as fast as they were then. But the other problem provides a real conundrum in that we know people who live in mom and pop apartment buildings that are very old or, you know, not in great repair. And they have, you know, really wonderfully low rent. And they also have problems with the apartment that they're afraid to even bring up with the landlord because there, you know, especially some of these buildings, the landlord eventually passed on, and now it's owned by their heirs, and everybody's wondering, you know, what's going to happen now, and they don't want to bring any attention to themselves because, well, for one thing, as they know, we don't have no fault ordinance in Albany, but in many of these cases, I think they're not going to be resolved without the tenant leaving. And I'd like to speak to the relocation payments to make sure that they are enough for a person really to move into another place. Because with all of the fees and how high rents have gotten, they would need more than just first and last month. They would need, you know, a certain number of months of rent just to make up for losing far under market rate unit. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Any more online?
Hello, good evening, Chair and members of the Housing Advisory Committee. My name is Saya Fertala, and I'm a housing provider here in Albany. And as you consider policies that shape our housing and stability, I want to offer a perspective grounded in systems thinking. Housing doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's tied to employment, economic mobility, and land use. While tools like rent control and just cause protections may offer short-term relief, they don't address the structural issues that drive instability over time. Affordability isn't just about rent levels. It's about income, opportunity, and whether people can build a life where they live. A policy framework that focuses on only on rent stabilization without strengthening the local economy is like managing traffic congestion without investing in public transit. You're managing symptoms, not solving the underlying issue. If Albany is serious about long-term affordability, we need a broader, more sustainable approach, one that supports both tenants and housing providers by investing in systems that shape economic resilience. I believe that we should be prioritizing most of our time, and I realize that I'm off topic, but not really. Let's bring back employers to Albany. The city can work with regional partners to attract future-focused industries like clean energy, green tech, and biotech. These aren't job creators. They help stabilize households and reduce rent burden. Zoning reform and streamlined permitting for commercial spaces should be seen as a housing policy too. We need to support vocational training and skills development so that Albany residents can access better paying jobs. When people earn more, they can afford to live here without relying on rent control to make ends meet. That's good for tenants, it's good for housing providers who are trying to maintain quality housing. AB 1482 was passed during a time of crisis, but no emergency policy should last forever. We should set measurable benchmarks like wage growth, job creation, and housing production, and commit reevaluating policies like rent caps and just cause once these goals are met. Other cities like Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Boston have moved away from permanent rent control by focusing on long-term growth and inclusion. Albany has the opportunity to do the same. I hope we can start viewing affordability not just as a rent issue, but as a broader planning challenge, one that demands economic, housing, and workforce systems working together. That's how you build a stable, inclusive, and future-ready Albany. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment.
Anyone else wishing to speak? And that is it.
Seeing none, we will bring it back to the commission for deliberation and our thoughts for staff to take forward. And we'll also answer some questions first. So there was one in there, Chris, I don't know if you can explain that chart a little more in depth.
Yes, definitely. I will be the first to say that this chart is limited and confusing in terms of what it is that we can conclude from it. It is unfortunately the data that we have available. The chart showed in every given quarter how many unlawful detainers were filed originating in the city of Albany. And so we saw that that had a certain level before the pandemic. It dropped to just maybe one per quarter during the pandemic, and then returned mostly to the level of before, which I think was about 5 or 6 on average. 5 or 6 unlawful detainers may sound like a lot, but we also don't know what the disposition of those were or what the reasons or outcome were. It only is a report of what was filed in court and nothing more.
Thank you for that additional detail. I'll see if I can get some more detail behind that chart from the county. There was a question about what is exempt and what not, specifically around the timing of what's covered as well as single-family homes. If you could offer a little more detail there.
Yes, I'll definitely refer the person who had that question to page 5 of the staff report. There's more detail there. I'll say that there was initially kind of an idea that most single-family homes and condos that were rented did not have 1482 applying. It was actually that the types of housing that Just Cause applies to was increased in the passage of SB 567. And what we attempted to do here in the staff report was just show what the law is now post both of these laws together, rather than to try and describe the evolution, just for a little bit more clarity. However, yes, there are exemptions, for example, when the owner lives in the unit and is renting out rooms, or if the owner lives in one unit of the duplex. Now, there are some local protection ordinances that have tried to bring even those units into just cause protections, and that can be an option. In Berkeley and Oakland, they have really created a lot of specificity around when that exemption can apply.
And to further clarify on what SB 567 says, and to get to what the commenter said, I believe it exempts most single-family homes provided they're not owned by certain types of corporations or LLCs and do not provide a written notice that tenant is exempt, correct?
So I understand that 567, one of the things that it did in regards to that was try to avoid situations where people would reorganize their ownership in an LLC to avoid just cause protections. So I don't know that exemption is alive after 567.
I believe, I'm looking at 567 right now, and it says that it is exempted when the owner is not a real estate investment trust, corporation, LLC, or management of a mobile home park. Correct?
So when it is not
Right.
organized that way. Okay, I understand what you're saying. And yes, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. There was also a question about, and I don't know if we have this information to hand, about the impact of this sort of policy in the cities that we've referenced as being around here and in the Bay.
Well, I appreciate the question, and that is definitely what we would do ideally to try to, do a test case of these ordinances and find out what kind of impact they had. As we know, all of our entire region is in a huge affordability crisis, and it is there's no research that I am aware of that indicates that affordability was reduced or made better or made worse uniquely in the cities that had a tenant protection ordinance or not. That doesn't mean that impact, is not plausible. I think it is a plausible impact. Of course, you're going to impact the market when you change the rules of the game. But the type of study that the person, the caller was referring to, I'm not aware of that existing or really being possible when you have such a complex and such a regional market where it all influences each other.
And I would just like to add that each local tenant protection ordinance is very different, so the impact that one may have would be very specific to the actual regulations adopted, as well as the market of that. We're all in a pretty still hot real estate market, but it may still be a little bit hotter to live in Berkeley maybe than San Pablo, but regardless, it's what's adopted and what the local conditions are in the community. So it would be very difficult, though we would be able to get individual anecdote for sure for any situation. So when you move forward, please keep those concerns in mind.
Thank you for all of that clarification. And with that, we'll turn it over to comments from the committee. Does anyone want to start us off? Commissioner Marks?
Did somebody else want to start? I don't want to start. Well, first of all, I'm really disappointed because I felt like this one area, this one section would be something that we could come to some kind of compromise with the landlords. That maybe there was stuff that you want in a just cause ordinance that I wouldn't want, but if you really wanted it, it would be an area where we could work with you and say, okay, if that's important to you, let's do it. I mean, the situation that Elaine explained, I mean, to me, that's a just cause. You have just cause to get rid of the guy. I mean, I don't see, I mean, I think it's horrible. I've heard a lot of horrible landlord stories, horrible tenant stories. And I know there's a lot of wonderful landlords, and I want to give a shout out to Gabby, who's right down the street from me with 6 units. The tenants love her, and she's a great landlord. So I'm off subject. Anyway, like I said, I felt like this could be an area of compromise. I agree with you, Mr. Campbell. You said lack of data. I mean, we need a registry. That's the only way we're going to get the data to know what's going on. And when I hear you talk about, the restrictions, and people don't like restrictions, so they get rid of their rental property. Berkeley has more restrictions than any city I know of. And there are buildings being built all over that city, and apartments, and, people are not leaving that rental market. The last thing I want to say is one of the callers said, rent control does not strengthen the local community. And I believe it does strengthen it. I believe it gives people some peace of mind. I mean, the city's more than 50% renters. It gives them some peace of mind and a little stability so that they know that they have the just cause. If they're not doing anything, then they're okay as tenants.
Just would quickly like to say that I believe that what we're trying to do here is something that is honorable, but also at the same time, I don't feel like we should be adding regulation without the scaffolding to make sure that that regulation is going to be adhered to by renters or the owners. And I see that as being a huge problem. And what ends up happening is all of this right here becomes very performative, because we can come up with some new regulation, but if we don't have the buy-in by the owners who aren't even registering, or the education of the renters like myself, I don't know half the things as a renter that supposedly I'm supposed to know. And adding to that, to just make one more hoop for owners to jump through, to me, I think we need a lot more information. I think we need to make sure that we're very, very deliberate in what we're doing here. And I just would very much like to thank everybody here for being a part of the process.
I have one comment, but also a follow-up question. Just on the number of, can I ask the follow-up question? On the exemptions for the owner-occupied homes, what about ADUs? Like homes that have the ADUs, are those exempt basically from what I'm reading?
Yeah, the ADUs, thanks for the question. ADUs and junior ADUs are considered the same as other units after 567.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
So what that means is that the just cause rules, if you have an ADU for that unit, are the same as if you had a duplex. There's no distinction, additional protection or reduced protection because it's an ADU as opposed to another type of unit.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I just want to, echo a little bit of what the Commissioner Cantu said about this is a really difficult presentation that we're looking at because on one hand, I think it is important. I do think that it's important to provide protections for renters to have a really healthy community where you have just a variety of households, low income, high income, but I do hear the concerns about just setting up excessive regulations and what that might cause, what the implications of those are. I do wish we had more information. We don't have the, like you say, we don't have enough research on that, and so that's a little bit worrisome of, what the implications of setting up additional regulations would be. It does seem to me that the state laws are pretty robust, yet there are some gaps. There's certainly people that are, probably falling through the cracks on that. I would want to, address those, I think, but I will want to make sure that we do it in a way that there is a compromise, so that we're not discouraging housing providers and at the same time really being able to provide sufficient protections for tenants. Precisely because we are in such a housing crisis, it is important, I think, to provide those protections, especially to families who can afford to buy homes and who are just renting here. That's all.
This is going to take a minute. First, overarchingly, and I've heard you repeat multiple times state law at 567, which is the just cause protections that are passed by the state. We don't seem to have a crisis here in Albany with evictions. If you look at this, you had said it was an average of 5 to 6. I'm seeing more of an average of 4 to 5 since 2020. So it's not like there's this massive eviction stampede of owners here trying to get rid of tenants. So you have a state law that does provide some just cause protections, and that's only going to get more stringent over time. The state adds, just like all the other cities in Oakland and Berkeley and Richmond, add every year more and more bureaucracy to the housing. I was very active civically in Oakland from 2010 to like 2021, 2022. When the Community Economic Development Department was having a hearing for the first tenant protection ordinance in Oakland, I was on the call. There were 21 speakers against it, 16 for it, and they still voted it in. And I realized that this is only going to get worse here. The target on the backs of property owners just grew with the passage of that TPO. I had 6 condominiums that I owned with partners. I emailed them the next day. We sold them all. They're no longer rentals. And we moved the money out of state because we couldn't take the risk that there was going to be more and ever more regulation coming in. It makes it too hard to operate. A friend of mine, as I've mentioned before, evicted a person on Vermont Street on an 8-unit building. He had to pay $130,000 to get this person out. This person used every rule, every law that was passed with his attorneys to extend and protractively delay the eviction. That kind of loss, an owner can't really sustain. So I think you want to be careful. There's not an injured patient here yet. I think you have the state laws. I think we go with the state laws. It's easier to manage. It's less costly for us. We can do better with the registry, finding out who lives where, telling them these are the laws. You have a state just cause protections. You've got state rent control. Yes, there are exemptions if you're not an LLC, a corporation. If you're a private person, you're exempt if you only own 2 units. If you own more than 2 units as a private person, you're subject to rent control. So I don't know that there is a crisis that requires this to be passed. I think we can follow the state, and I think we accomplish a lot of what you want to accomplish here without starting a huge argument between property owners and residents and the council and the commission. I think you have something in place, let it roll for a while longer, and see if your evictions go up. I don't know that you have a problem here yet with evictions. So, okay, that's what I got.
Any further comments from members of the commission? I will say a couple of notes. I think it's been brought up on the commission and from public comment about the low level of evictions. I think it's always important to note that, like staff mentioned, that is not necessarily a complete picture. That's the ones that get to the unlawful detainer stage. And there are, I think, a lot of people who, if they get that first notice, they are going to self-evict because they don't want an eviction on their record, they don't have the resources to fight it, and they are scared. So that doesn't necessarily capture everything. But I also don't think that we should take the good news that we don't have a huge amount of unlawful detainers happening in Albany right now to mean that we shouldn't have baseline protections. And it's been brought up that, are we doing this just to do it, and are we doing it because other cities around us are doing it? Well, we don't have the full list in our staff report of the cities in the county that have done this, but it's, I think, getting towards more than half of them are passing just cause or considering it, including the unincorporated county at the county level, which they recently passed. So pretty soon, I think Albany will start to be an outlier for not having passed it and having fewer protections than our neighboring cities. And I don't think that's what we should be known for. I don't think our rental market should rely in Albany on having less protection than others around us. And I think it's also important to think about this from the perspective of the tenants who Member Marks mentioned, of, there are people in Albany who feel afraid to speak up or negotiate with their landlords because they know that they're not protected. And I've been in that situation. I've had to negotiate with the landlord and know that my unit wasn't covered by just cause, so there was not much I could do. And I think that is a really uncomfortable place for people to find themselves, and a good reason to try and fill in the gaps of what the state has overall, because there are a lot of gaps. It was a compromise, the state knew it was a compromise, and it was meant as a floor that would be built on. Now, that's not to say that we can't do it well and do it smart. It's all about implementation, like everything is. I will probably talk about implementation for every single item we talk about on this committee. That doesn't necessarily mean, enforcement. Albany is a small town. We will probably not have a huge enforcement arm. But there are resources that we can provide without having a huge amount of investment or work that will make that process easier. Berkeley has some good policy and the state has some good policy, but it doesn't necessarily have the resources that are needed to make use of that. And I think there are a lot of landlords who get confused in Berkeley or in Oakland because they are unclear of what they have to do or not do, and Berkeley's resources are not exactly helpful on that front, always. So I think our chance to do something that's efficient and doesn't take a huge amount of resources is to have those resources that say, okay, now that we passed this policy, what do you have to do about it? And what are your obligations? And what do you have to do with tenants? And have just guides and things that make it easier for people to work with, because this shouldn't be a huge, difficult thing to implement. I'll just say before I talk about some of the things I think we should include in Just Cause, you know, like one of the commenters said, yes, this doesn't solve the housing crisis. Nothing really is a silver bullet in one policy to solve it, and it is treating a symptom, but there are a lot of symptoms of the housing crisis that need to be addressed. Homelessness is a symptom of the housing crisis, and I think it is a humanitarian necessity to do something about it. Similarly, preventing people from being evicted and becoming homeless in the first place is a necessity of how we address that crisis. We also need to do things to increase the housing stock, but this is saying that we have to only do that and not do things like this, I don't think is an argument to not do things that protect people from losing their housing. So on the specifics of what I think a Just Cause ordinance should include and how it should differ from state laws, I think there are gaps there. I think it is smart to decrease the time limit from 12 months, as that means that there's an incentive to evict people before that, as well as that people are not protected for the vast majority of tenancy often. I think it is imperative to include all rental units, or as many as possible, especially single-family homes, and not exempt them because they're owned by an individual versus an LLC. That is, I think there's good reason to think that a fair portion of our housing stock is that, and I don't think there's a reason that those tenants shouldn't be protected. I think high relocation is necessary, but you know, finding that right amount can be complicated, so I think it's probably best to keep it simple. Albany County uses 2 months, others use a different amount per income. I think probably 2 or 3 months is probably good. And I think it's necessary to beef up right of return policies. We mentioned those in state law. 1482, the legislature knew that they didn't get it right there. That's partly why 567 was passed, to fill some of those gaps and because some of those no-fault evictions were being abused. And then I think it's I think extra noticing for some special populations is usually a good idea. I don't want to make it too onerous for people. Some jurisdictions have additional protections for special populations. If we want to explore that, I think we could, but I think the easiest way to do is just increase notice in those cases. And then I think the non-negotiable, I think, should be filing notices with the local department and making that an affirmative defense against eviction. I think most jurisdictions do that. It's pretty simple of just sending in your notice when you send it to your tenant to send it to the housing director of the city. They have it on file, and then it is in public record to say, was this filed or not? Have you comported with the law? Did you have the reasons that you needed to put on there that say that you are using a just cause or a no fault or what have you? I think that's a very easy thing to do. It doesn't take a lot of administrative burden to do it. I'm working on that in my day job. It is possible and doesn't take a huge amount of staff time to file that away. I think I will leave it there. Do we have any further comment from members of the commission?
Thank you for all of that. That was great. And just looking at some of the other just cause protections by some of the other cities, for example, Berkeley's, I think, the inclusion of newer buildings and some of the stipulations around owner-occupied buildings might be reasonable. I do worry quite a bit about increasing the relocation assistance payments. That just seems overly onerous. So just want to put that out there.
I would like to add that there are protections currently. It's not that they're not protected. They have state protections. It's state law that exists already. And I think, again, as I said earlier, you don't have this real problem with evictions. And tenants can get access to legal help much easier than landlords can. So that needs to be understood too, because the landlords have to pay for their attorneys. The tenants can go to the East Bay Law Center. If there's a wrongful eviction, boom, they're going to handle it. They just got $1 million from the City Council of Oakland. They took it from the vacant land tax. So there's lots of money for the lawyers to go do that.
Any further comments from commission members? Seeing none, hopefully you have what you need from us. And we thank staff very much for their presentation on this topic and look forward to discussing it in a more final form when we go through all of our items. With that will bring us to item number 6, announcements. Do we have any staff announcements?
Yes, I do want to just go over our new webpage and some of the problems, and just for if there is, still some people online, and for those of you in the audience. So, so this is our new portal with our nice new logo, and in the future, I was also to get to the if you go to quick links, you can go to meetings and agendas, which is the first item. Just a note to the commissioners themselves, in the future, I will be sending you the link to this page, because I found out that if we change something and I send you the link to our actual agenda, then that won't work either. So when you get to this page, you just scroll down, and if I do send you a link, as you can see, the Housing Advisory Commission is here currently, so you can click on the agenda, and under each item, if there is attachments, there is something that says view details. This is the button that is not currently working. So currently, if you hit it, you'll get the error button. So that we know of, and that's apology. The workaround is to click on the item itself, which brings a drop-down menu. And then the items will be listed here, and you can either use this eyeball to just pull it up or the cloud to download it. So if you don't want to download it, you can just view it this way. So apologies that the one view details doesn't let you view the details. That will be fixed hopefully in the future, and we'll keep you updated. Usually there's 2 ways to view the items, but for now, if you can just kind of click on that and then use the eyeball or download, that would be helpful. Just want to make sure if there's any questions about that, because it's very important that we're able to share the information. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was thinking, thank you for that explanation, because I wasn't aware, I was able to find what I wanted to find, but I wasn't aware that it was that easy. But if there could be some kind of a notice on the error message screen to this effect, how to do it or something, just so that somebody coming in cold would be able to find the information.
I will see, and I'll see if I think that's a great idea if we can configure that. So.
Thank you for that detail and for staff's work, and especially the work of IT and city clerk. I know we have a comment, so let's go to that. If there's one more question on that information.
Yes. Thank you.
Hi. That's why I hadn't seen the staff report for the meeting tonight, because I didn't know that you could click on it and it would drop down, and all I got was the error message. So maybe in the error message, as was suggested, but maybe just in the confirmation email that we get when we register to sign in, register for the meeting, in that email, because it might be easier than doing it in the error message, just saying, by the way, if when you, however you want to describe it, when you want to get the information, click on the item itself and don't click on the further details. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any other committee member announcements?
No.
Seeing-
Okay. Any commissioner announcements?
Seeing none. That will bring us to our next meeting. Will be on May 7th at the same time and place. And with that, that'll lead us to our adjournment. Thank you to staff, the other commission members, and all of the members of the public who joined us. We are adjourned.